Angus, welcome all the way from Canberra. I just want to say, I haven't commented on this since you've been here, but that's an incredible moustache you have.
Thank you very much.
Because that was Movember last year, wasn't it?
Little trade secret, I actually got rid of the stash in January, didn't have it until last month. So this is only a month old. But you're not doing too bad yourself.
My facial hair, like on my upper lip's very blonde. So like, you can't really tell. But no, anyway, I just wanted to say that before we begin. For people who don't know you, you've been around the world a bit. Could you just explain to the audience what your story is?
As you mentioned before, I currently live in Canberra, study at the Australian National University. A second year doing a double degree in international relations and commerce, majoring in international business. So imagine supply chain logistics, global disruptions, shocks, that kind of jazz. In my build up to uni, I'm from Wagga, a small town in New South Wales, 60,000 people. So it's not really small, but it's small enough compared to where we are now.
Yeah.
And so kind of just have always had a passion for international relations. Instead of watching Ben 10 of an afternoon, I'd put, BTN, if people remember BTN, or the good old days, or, the afternoon news with my dad in the room while he was working. And so from a pretty young age, I've always been fascinated about how the world works. I've been able to travel and experience different cultures. So it's kind of been a progressing journey of how do I incorporate my love of travel, my love of, serving others, and also how do I leave the world in a better place than I started. So that's kind of the foundation of where I've gone. And then from there, it's just kind of progressed through, the likes of youth parliament. I was a delegate on the inaugural National Youth Cabinet in 2023, 2024. So kind of basically lobbying politicians on the perspectives of young people. And then we've kind of had the period of working on the Hill, volunteering and interning in staffers in political offices, and now kind of working in the national security space. So the journey's kind of weaved around. It's not been a very linear path, but it's been an enjoyable path nonetheless.
And before we get to like what you're currently doing and your future aspirations and all that, you come from Wagga.
Yeah.
Not many people, definitely across the world, will have heard of Wagga.
No.
And increasingly, I think more and more people probably haven't heard of Wagga, like younger people maybe,
yeah, absolutely.
Or definitely haven't been there. And you've been to conferences like around the world. What's the experience like when you like meet people and you're like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Wagga. Sorry, what?
Yeah, it's a lot of that.
Yeah.
It's, I can remember vividly an experience where I was in Thailand at a United Nations kind of humanitarian university leaders style conference. And we're kind of getting to know all the other delegates, and we're at breakfast at the hotel, and I was sitting across from a now friend from South Africa, and she's from Cape Town, and she's like, so where are you from? Like, you're obviously Aussie, but where? And I said Wagga, and she goes, like, huh? Like, are you speaking English? Like, because, Wagga, or as it's actually known as Wagga Wagga, so much ice, they named it twice. It's easier to just describe that you're just kind of far away from Sydney. You just live in the countryside. But when people get more educated about Wagga, you kind of see this kind of light bulb moment where they then feel invited to speak about the small towns in their communities. And you can find connections just in the same way that if you said you're from Sydney, you could say you're from LA, and you'd have that kind of relation to what it's like to live there. But more so, we're seeing kids from the bush and kids from the country coming into cities and educating people on what it's like to live in the country, because you just don't get that normally.
So do you want to have a go at that now? Like, just I've never been to Wagga.
No, I don't blame you.
I'm sure it's a nice place, but describe it for our audience. What are the main things in Wagga? What are the main events and all that?
So, admittedly, Wagga is not a town for young people. It's a incredibly important city for our national security capability. So Wagga is the home of RAF-based Wagga, so that's where all aviation technicians are trained, and one RTCB Kapuka, which is the training camp. So every soldier, every person in the Australian Army has to go through Wagga. And so it's their initial training. So military and defence is a really key sector in our city. You'll just see a rotating door of servicemen in and out of the city, and we have a massive veterans presence there as well. Massive agricultural hub and supply chain hub. So, wheat, livestock, canola is a massive industry as well. So it's what you'd expect for a typical town in the sense of agriculture and, that kind of country community way of life. But increasingly, it's becoming more advanced with its connections. So we've got now a interstate rail freight link hub in Wagga. So, multinational firms and kind of corporations are being able to use Wagga as a stop to store their freight between hubs in Australia. So the industries are becoming more diverse, but it's still a bit conservative in the way it operates as a city. But in saying that, a lot of my work I did when I was there is to make it a more inclusive space. So it's still growing, but it's got a lot of potential.
And you were, I believe you're on the, was it committee for Wagga? And you were helping organise the Australia Day for 2025.
Yeah.
How was that work? Because obviously, as you said, you're working to make it a more inclusive place. How did that interact with your work on that committee?
Committee for Wagga is an incredible agency. So it's like a peak body for businesses and community firms. It's separate and independent from council. And so I got engaged with them through a student leaders program, kind of year 10, going into senior school. They want to get more young ambassadors for the city. And it was life-changing. Absolutely found my groove, came out of my shell. And they do a lot of events for, welcome to Wagga for refugee community, because Wagga has one of the highest Yazidi population in Australia. So it's a really big asset of Wagga is that it's actually very multicultural. And
for those who don't know, Yazidis they're from Iraq and Syria,
correct,
right?
yes. So a lot of that population was displaced in the war. And so under previous governments, kind of home affairs and immigration policies brought them to Wagga. And so they've been an exceptional part of our community, really diversified the options. So, you see the barber shops and, different cuisines. And it's made it a lot more than just the kind of traditional Australian meals you would find in a country town, but it opens it up and adds a real layer of kind of social cohesion in Wagga, which is, it's a two-edged sword and it can hurt you or help you, but in Wagga, for the most part, it helps. With relation to the Australia Day Council Committee I was on with Wagga, that was a really big challenge in navigating the quite delicate narrative of Australia Day. So my personal position is that we should be celebrating it in a responsible way, not a outlandish, let's just go wild and fly Aussie flags everywhere. Like, let's be proud of who we are as a nation, whilst also recognizing that we're a country with two histories, not just one. And so we utilized a lot of different strategies in that committee to kind of bring social cohesion between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people and kind of make it more seamless and integrated. So simultaneously, we'd have Indigenous truth-telling stories and an Invasion Day concert and kind of adapt and adjust the way we looked at Australia Day to make sure that everyone was heard, everyone's story was told, and it wasn't just kind of what we see on the news and portrayed by commentators, which is a day which should either be celebrated or not. So what I think Wagga does it right, and I'm really proud of the work we did to continue having meaningful discussions whilst also being proud of our national identity.
Yep. And we've spoken a bit about your passions or your desire to, educate people on on the regions, on the country.
Yeah.
The collaboration with Indigenous Australians with regard to the Australia Day
Absolutely.
planning.
Yep.
I believe you're also or were a volunteer with an organisation helping people living with disability.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kurrajong is a non-for-profit disability service provider based out of Wagga. It's the largest disability support provider organisation in the Riverina, so the region where Wagga is. Wagga is kind of like the key city, I guess you'd call it. But the entire region is serviced by Kurrajong. I was brought in by my grandmother, who was a director there at the time, kind of organised a lot of the community engagements. And as part of that, they had an annual race day, which was a fundraising event. So coinciding with like the local turf club, when they have horse racing, they would run events and stalls, and you'd pay for a ticket entrance to the races, and all the proceeds would go to Kurrajong, and they would support people with disabilities. So a bit of a personal one for me as well. My uncle has a physical and intellectual disability. He's got Down syndrome. What I've observed over my time volunteering there is, and just in society generally, is we still have a very long way to go about A, recognising and B, including people with disability into our community. And that's something I'm super passionate about. Living around my uncle, who he's quite high functioning for someone with a disability, but nonetheless still has inherent complications and needs support. People in society look at someone who looks differently or acts differently or needs different assistance and kind of shuns them and pushes them to the back of the line, puts them in, the glass box and sends them off. I think Australia needs to develop the way we look at disability and be more inclusive around that lens and give the service that they need. And I'm really proud that the work that I've been able to do with Kurrajong gives that help. So, group homes, community farm out in Wagga called Hildesid that my grandmother was really involved in, and I've been able to grow up around that. And that's now serving as a way for the community to interact with the group home, which is on site on this property. And so you've kind of got, cafes, vegetable gardens. It's a really seamless and kind of unconscious way of being able to interact with the community whilst not being blaring and saying, this person has a disability, this person has a disability, which, like previously and historically we would do. So it makes it a bit more seamless and a bit less rigid in the way we interact while still providing the support. So I love that work, and it's something that I'm going to continue to advocate for right up until who knows when.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a pretty phenomenally run organisation if it's able to organise all that.
It is truly some of the most amazing people you will ever meet. My grandma's retired now, but shout out to grandma. But the calibre and the compassion of the people you meet. I can remember this one lady. I was at an award ceremony, and she's a locally known figure, and she's also got Down syndrome, a good friend with my uncle, and she runs up on stage and just gives our local federal MP, Michael McCormack, a hug, and everyone just recognises her, and everyone's just so friendly with her, and it's the kind of community I want to see replicated across Australia and the world, for that matter. Is people with disabilities aren't different to us, they just have different requirements. The same way you and I need different things to survive and be happy, so do they. And
you've had an opportunity to take that advocacy further with opportunities like New South Wales Youth Parliament, and you were also fortunate enough to be a delegate to the national, was it Youth Cabinet?
Yeah.
So explain how, just generally, how youth parliaments work and how you're able to tie your passions in with that.
Yeah. Well, look, youth parliaments often cop the nerd camp allegations.
I think that's fair, but yeah.
Look, agree to disagree. No, yeah. They definitely are. And
not necessarily a bad thing. But
no, absolutely. Yeah. I think nerds rule the world. New South Wales Youth Parliament, it's run by the Y, so it's another non-for-profit organisation with backing from the New South Wales government. So it's basically a 6-month program where you basically represent your electorate in a youth caucus, in a youth parliament. There's fictitious parties, not actually political parties, so it doesn't go on like party lines, but it's designed to basically advocate and enhance young people's voices whilst also giving them democratic literacy. We did 2 camps. Your first camp, you meet everyone, you get to come up with ideas. You're in different committees. So, for example, I was on the Transport, Roads and Infrastructure Committee. You come up with your bill and then you write it yourself over the next few months. And then it's 1 week in July, we debate the bills, and everyone speaks, and you get actual MPs in the chair, and we debate in the House in New South Wales.
That's pretty cool.
On Macquarie Street, and it was excellent. A lot of politically active young people who are quite keen to be in New South Wales Parliament and show off to the actual MPs. So you can imagine the debates get quite rowdy.
Yeah.
But that basically was another avenue which let me advocate for greater accessibility in the region. So our bill was focused around increasing accessibility on transport. As a part of a personal highlight was incorporating a idea I stole off of a trip when I went to Japan, and it's in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, there are carriages specifically nominated for women. And while I was writing the bill, I was seeing instances of, assault against passengers and polls of unsafe feelings on trains and public transport in New South Wales. So I was like, can we come up with an idea which implements the system which really works well in Japan and put it in Australia? So put it in the bill. The bill was passed. We had discussions with representatives from the New South Wales government. It was productive, but the whole process, despite things not actually being implemented necessarily, it was a really good opportunity to see how the democratic process works. How do you come up with a bill? How do you advocate with things in a democratic forum? How do you debate and adjust legislation to make it the best of both worlds, and kind of the ability to compromise on legislation and then advocate for your community? So being able to represent the people of Wagga meant I got to speak with a whole bunch of young people, a bunch of senior citizens, a bunch of people from marginalised communities, and take that stuff because it was visibility that otherwise wouldn't be had. And so these programs are excellent for that. And from there, I was then contacted by the Y Australia, so the peak national body for the different states and territories, and they wanted to implement a national youth cabinet in the same way that you have a federal cabinet, you have ministries, and you basically come up with ideas and then lobby them to the actual relevant minister in federal parliament. So we utilised the content from the bills of that year from young people as our kind of framework to work on. And we had 4 groups, 2 delegates from each state and territory, minus the ACT because we were there, and they didn't have a youth parliament program. But that is starting next year, exciting things out of the capital. And we found that overwhelmingly the issues that mattered to young people were disability access, housing, cost of living, cybersecurity, and violence against women and sexual violence. So we kind of took all these ideas and made 4 different policy pitches that we would take to the relevant ministers. And so we had meetings up at Parliament last April or March, May, that period of time. And we met with, Claire O'Neill's staff, Anna Lee. We met with Shadow Ministry, so Angie Bell. We also met with a bunch of other MPs who were just interested in the young people process. So Zoe McKenzie, Keith Wallahan. And so it really opened the Pandora's box on what the federal parliament looks like, because it's really, I think in Australia we have a really good ability to see what federal parliament looks like as opposed to other parts of the world. We don't have a high power distance relationship between our political leaders. You can see Albo going for a walk around the lake most weekends back home. but it's still opened that bit further into the private, behind the scenes of Parliament House. You know, you can see the chambers, but you can't see what's behind them. And so there's a really good opportunity for enhancing my democratic literacy whilst also advocating for now a state instead of just a region.
And before we get on to what you currently do, you're also Young Citizen of the Year for Wagga. How did that come about?
It's a good question. You should ask the person who nominated me, who I'm still yet to work out. So year 2024. So basically, at the time, over 2023, through Youth Parliament, National Cabinet, Disability Advocacy, and also I was a campaign manager on the Yes 23 campaign. So doing, again, as we mentioned before, really trying to understand the kind of interlinking of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people into Australia. You know, results aside, it was an amazing experience to understand what community feels like and what First Nations people feel like. So I made some amazing connections to people in kind of the Wiradjuri nation, and I still have those connections today, and it's super lovely. But yeah, I was given the honour and the privilege of being named Young Citizen for Wagga and joining an amazing group of other young people who had gotten it before me, who I've been able to stay in contact with on different occasions, and it has opened a lot of doors locally that otherwise may have not, but I've, in the best way possible, tried to open the door from my own side for other young people. You know, you don't need to have a title to lead, and I'm all about servant leadership. I want to see people leading by their actions and helping the community generally. A project I'm trying to push for back home is the formation of a youth council. We don't have one currently. I think it's a shame. And I want to see more young people engage with council and share what they think could make Wagga an even better city leading into the future. So the opportunity has, you know, the title has given me a lot of opportunities, and I'm very grateful for it. But I genuinely don't know how I got to where I did, but it's been an enjoyable process and what I'm, you know, will forever be grateful for.
And quick question, I've been contemplating this for a few months now, ever since I believe there was a news article on the ABC about lack of civic education literacy among young people. And I suspect it's been trending that way for a few decades now. You're pretty much in the civic engagement space, effectively. Do you think we could benefit from some more civic education in schools, or is it like stuff outside of schools that we need to encourage people to get into, or both?
It needs to be a whole of nation approach. I agree, and I too read the same article about the decline in civic education amongst young people, and I think first and foremost, the AEC needs to bring in some sort of political education system, and especially in a world where we're dealing with mis and disinformation, such a big risk in the social media era to politics. We need to see better education to spotting it and mitigating it. And I think that can come from not just school, you know, classes, whether that's a year 11 and 12 mandatory course you have to take or a workshop you do, but it's something that needs to be ingrained into our system across society, is understanding what it means to be enrolled in the electoral roll, what it means to vote in an election, what it means for laws to be created, you know. A lot of people still, when I talk to them, even at uni, don't fully understand the democratic process of creating a bill. They think, great, Prime Minister's had an idea, that's now enforced.
Yeah, not so simple.
It's not a presidential order. It can't just be brought in that way. And that's a really good thing about our democracy, and it's a really big strength to our national security, is you can't have someone like that kind of just run in and throw a wrecking ball in and do what they want. But I think if we could develop a strategy which incorporates all three levels of government, uses civic community groups like PCYCs and other kind of youth action groups like Youth Parliament, that's a leading example of civic engagement, then I think our country would be a lot better off than if not. And at the end of the day, something that I have to reiterate to people is that you have to make sure that you know you have a democratic right, and you can choose the donkey vote if you want. I wouldn't advise it.
I wouldn't advise that either, but yeah.
And that is your right, but just know the implications of that, because you want to make sure your vote counts, and you want to make sure that your vote leads to the outcome you want. Because if you're going to then complain on social media or in the community that you're not getting the representation you wanted, it comes from votes and being more educated on, you know, what does this politician stand for? What do they vote for? Who's in their ear? You know, you've got to look at all these things and be educated. And I think this era will see a lot more of that hopefully coming, but we need to catch the curve before it gets too bad.
And I guess the thing about like youth parliaments and all that is that, as you said, they're great for understanding the democratic process.
Yeah.
Also, the people who are going to put their hands up for it probably already know enough to like navigate elections for the rest of their lives. So yeah, as you said, there probably needs to be some sort of mandatory thing that people have to go through, at least like even to understand like ranked choice voting, something like that.
And they're also selective. Youth parliament programs are selective on a application-based process. So we need stuff that is just readily available to everyone. Make it mandatory. Make an app, something.
Yeah.
TikTok ads all the time that you can't skip.
Yeah. Now that we've got your background and all of your wonderful achievements and all that, you're currently a research assistant at the ANU National Security College. Explain to people what that involves.
Yeah, so the research assistant role basically is a bit of a support, and kind of you wear many hats under one title. So for background for the audience on what the National Security College is, because it's a very fancy title and people may not fully understand. It's basically a Commonwealth government initiative set up in 2007, 2008 to basically enhance national security literacy. So we have a three-pronged approach to how we go about that. We have executive and professional courses, so running workshops for senior government officials, or we just recently ran one for school teachers on literacy and mis and disinformation. We have our policy and engagement, so I'd highly recommend viewers to also, after listening to this excellent episode, go listen to National Security Podcast. We upload episodes all the time and it's super interesting content. And then we also do publications. So, we occasionally will write publications through our academics and our senior team on different subject matters, whether that's through media or formal, written books. So the role as a research assistant is basically to enhance the capabilities of everyone in the college, lighten the load, I guess, on some of the background kind of diving and sleuthing on information. So one of the projects that I'm kind of central to at the moment and for the foreseeable future is the National Security College's Community Consultations Project. So last year, Rory Medcalf, our head of college, he decided to launch and announce that we're going to be doing a nationwide consultation process, trying to understand what preparedness, what resilience, and what national security means for Australia. And so through that, we're going to every state, every territory, both city, regional, and rural, to understand what national security means to people. And so I'm really privileged that I've been asked to join that team and assist with the delivery, community engagement, and background research on that. So it's a very versatile role. Research assistants aren't just sitting at a desk every day looking at, what's going on in the world, because for the high-level staff that we have at the college, that's already known. But it's just about, as it says, assisting across a broad spectrum of tasks and delivering solid outcomes for the college. And that's an approach that we take right across the colleges. We want to strive for excellence and we want to be a pioneering force. And as a Commonwealth government initiative, we're going to always strive to do that.
Yeah, and that community consultation process, is that with the view of changing policy or shaping how governments communicate the policy that is already in place? What's the sort of impetus for it? Or what's the problem that it's trying to address?
The problem is we need greater understanding and outreach on national security. I think it's an issue which is front of mind for a lot of people with the current global kind of status. There's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of risk. People need to be prepared, people need to be educated, and governments need to be educated on what the nation thinks. Otherwise, realistically, they're not going to get re-elected.
So it's a bit of a two-way street.
It's a bit of a two-way street. So we seek to do this with the intention of advising peak bodies, both private and public, on perceptions and what people think. And this is the data. And we intend to write a report, which can be viewed publicly or privately, either way. But the main thing is just to understand Australian attitudes. That's our primary focus is. We want to understand Australian attitudes and from that, articulate what those views are coming in some sort of written report.
I read another article from the ABC, I think, as well, about the recent funding cuts to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Obviously, that's a different institution to you guys at the National Security College. But the ASPI was sort of critiquing the Albanese government's defence policy and saying, oh, you're not doing enough, basically, to defend the country. And Albanese's sort of response to that was, well, number one, yes, we are doing enough. And number two, those people who are writing those reports used to be in a position of governmental power where they had the ability to do something about it, and they didn't. Is there a similar sort of dynamic that occurs with the National Security College? Do you get that sort of criticism?
I don't. I have not seen that kind of criticism through the NSC. We're really supportive of the government's continued support of the NSC, so we do receive government support. So whilst being at the ANU, that allows us to deliver academic programs, but we also serve the public service and government. So it's a very unique and quite a bespoke organisation, and I think we're trying to run it in a dynamic which is constantly evolving and constantly changing. But I personally, on the ground, have not seen that kind of criticism in and around the security college.
And as you said, it's a pretty fraught time for our security. Do you want to, just getting to the meat of national security, what are some of the main issues that Australia faces at the moment? Like, I think people say, they might list, China, and then they might struggle to continue that list. Like, do you want to explain what the threats are, which one's the most prominent sources of it, that sort of thing?
So, look, Australia, just like any country on the planet, is facing a multitude of risks, not just because we're a democratic nation who seems to be friends with the United States or other countries in the Middle East, but we're also an island nation and we're isolated. So some of the issues that I think we're facing on a national security level, first and foremost, over the last few years, we've seen real struggles with social cohesion. And it's a bit unconventional, but with the rise of strong, passionate beliefs on both Jewish and Islamic sides, we're seeing social cohesion become far greater a challenge for governments to mitigate and manage. We want to see, in at least my view, Australia's greatest asset is its multiculturalism and multi-ethnicism. And if we can't get that, we're in a bit of a pickle. If we can't master that, we're in a bad state. And so I think as tensions across the globe continue to boil and reach, the overflow stage, we need to be really secure on what our national identity is and be inclusive of those who have traveled across the seas. It's legitimately in our national anthem.
Yeah.
To those who have traveled across the seas, we have boundless plains to share. This country is for all of us. We need to make sure that it stays that way and it doesn't get toxic in the way we deal with different cultures. Because, but even between you and I, we may have different ancestry, different beliefs, but we can be respectful of one another. And I think if we can't manage that risk in the immediate future, we are going to be really up ship creek if not.
Yeah.
Another risk, supply chains. So we are very dependent on foreign markets. And I think we need to be reviewing how we look at the economy. So, I am of a personal belief that a diversification of our industry, exports and imports, would be good. And also, in some ways, become a little bit more self-resilient in not just a security aspect, but a non-security aspect. So, homegrown produce, bring back the car industry.
So you're generally a supporter of programs or policies like Future Made in Australia, that sort of thing?
I think at its crux, it is a program which can support and boost Australian productivity. It can boost the economy while still keeping our overseas exports, because we inevitably and undoubtedly make some of the best produce in the world, and we have some of the best craftsmanship in the world. I'm a firm believer of that. And I think losing industries like the car industry with Holden and Ford back in the day was a big loss for our economy and a big loss for our workforce. The human capital decreased. We're seeing countries, easiest example is the United States, becoming more economically nationalist, and the whole America First agenda, we're going to slap tariffs on you. And if we end up in that alley where we've got tariffs and we need to look elsewhere, we need to also have the defense capability to meet the shortfalls. Like if AUKUS, crumbles, not only have we lost a lot of money, but we're also extremely under capacity for our human and our material capability defensively. And I think we need to see greater expansions of that as well.
And we can come to the US alliance and the issues and benefits of that later. And were there any other particular threats to national security before we drill down on some of them?
The China challenge will always exist. I think that is just a historical one, but I think it can be managed. We have a very big Chinese diaspora here in Australia, and we have good, strong trading relationships with China, albeit it has been rocky. But at its core, we can trade with China, and we know we can. And, China's one of our largest trading partners. I think another issue is climate change. And it's a bit it's a bit of a non-conventional security risk, but it's one that is absolutely going to affect Australia's national security. And if we don't start looking at the future will not only be here already before we know it, but we can't solve the future when it's already here. And when it comes to climate change, it requires cooperative action, which unfortunately I just don't think we'll get.
Just in terms of internationally?
Just internationally.
Yeah, I mean, India and China are, I believe, the biggest emitters by far, and they're continuing to build like coal-fired power stations and all that.
Yeah.
On climate change, when obviously, as you said, it's a non-conventional threat to national security. Do you want to, like some people might say, oh, that's disconnected. Australia is not like a low-lying Pacific island that's directly threatened by it. Maybe there'll be a couple more natural disasters, but that's not really a threat. Like, what would you say to that?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, for those who love to go on holiday to Fiji and to Vanuatu, with climate change, your resorts are going to be underwater before you know it. And if not, they're going to erode away. So if you really want the luxuries that you love, you need to recognize the risks of climate change. Second of all, Australia will still be impacted by whatever happens outside of us. Climate change is not isolated country by country. Climate change is for the entire world. And people need to understand that, climate change is real and it's happening. You know, the 2020 bushfires in New South Wales, southern Queensland and Victoria could have been a whole lot easier had we not, you know, mitigated climate risks and paid, you know, proper attention to our local environment. But also the flooding and, you know, events. This is all happening in part because of climate changes and adjustments in our climate and how it works. And it will only continue to get worse if we stay benevolent about it. So climate change transcends borders, and it will affect us. It may not be today, but it could be tomorrow.
A critique of that, I'm just challenging you, because obviously that's part of the mission of the NSC to sort of engage with public discourse. As you said, there's not really that much hope of addressing climate change unless there's cooperation internationally.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say humans are a lot better at adapting to problems than actually fixing them, especially when they can procrastinate. Do you think that's what we have to focus our efforts on more? On adapting rather than trying to fix the problem. Do you think it's too hard or too late to convince India and China?
I think one thing we need to look at with India and China, it comes back to the shortfallings of climate agreements. So a couple of things to touch on with that. So climate change agreements are only binding to those who sign it.
Mm.
I don't believe China or India have signed many climate agreements in their time. Second of all, there is this kind of cyclical issue in international affairs where, as a result of globalization, some countries are still developing while others are developed. You know, we live in a highly developed, advanced country. In the international classifications, India and China are still developing. They might be entirely advanced and very advanced, but under the frameworks that we have, they can pull the argument that they're still developing, and as such, don't have to adhere to the same levels of agreements that we do, or France does, or other parts of the world. And on that, I think when it comes to global cooperation, I have a bit of one would call it a neo-realist view of the world, that inherently people are just going to want what they want. You see my cup, even though you have yours, you're still going to take it. And you're going to expect someone to. So if you don't have cooperation and everyone's still thinking about what they want first and foremost, it's really hard for the world to collaborate and work together. I mean, you know, prime example is the US. They may have signed a climate agreement, but they're pulling out of them. It's a multifaceted and pertinent issue that's just going to keep existing if we don't have good cooperation. Do I think we need to be adapting as opposed to solving? I think it needs to be both. Okay. Inherently, it's going to be difficult to solve it, but if we're trying to adapt, what does adaptation look like into a world with climate change? We don't know that answer.
Fair question.
We don't, can we live on this earth if climate change reaches D-Day and, you know, the temperatures rise so high that it's unlivable?
Yeah, and then there's just the discussion of what temperature rise constitutes D-Day. But yeah.
Well, exactly. It's so many questions which I would rather leave to a climate scientist than myself as a university student.
Just on the security threats to Australia, I just want to ask two quick questions. Quick questions. They're a bit...
Questions nonetheless.
They're questions. So on the social cohesion, I think the UK is probably in a worse position than Australia with regards to social cohesion. Absolutely. And there are immigration success stories around the world. Like the United States has a famous history of immigration, of people contributing to the country. What sort of things can we do in Australia and in countries like Britain, maybe not as familiar as Australia, but to make sure that that immigration is managed successfully and that it's positive for all of us.
I'll start off by saying I believe Australia is an immigration success story. I think we weren't destined to be great. Like, you've got this incredible First Nations culture, which is rich with, national and natural heritage. But then you've got the kind of white settlement with, the convicts coming over. The UK clearly didn't want them, so they sent them to somewhere so far away, and they weren't destined to really make much of themselves. And now look at our country. I think we have to be proud of the continued, as you mentioned before, adaptation of our national framework, which includes everyone. I am so privileged that my own friend group, there's me, Australian, white Australian. I've got friends who have got Indian heritage, Tunisian heritage, Nepali heritage, American heritage, UK heritage. The country we live in is so diverse, and it is such an asset. But how do we effectively manage it?
What are some of the practical steps you might advocate for?
So it needs to be done in a common sense way. We can't open our borders so openly and so quickly that we can't cater to the people already living here. So an issue I think we're seeing a lot, especially with the housing crisis, is that we have so many people but not enough houses built yet. And it's in two part. The construction industry has just got too much red tape, and there's not enough mobility to just build houses. You look in China, during COVID, they built a 10,000 bed hospital, I think it was, in 10 days. It takes us years to do that here. So we need the supply of housing to accommodate people. So that's like your housing side of things. Immigration should happen at a steady rate. Immigration has to happen for our country to be successful, but it needs to be steady. It needs to be also, in a sense, I believe that if people are going to move to our country, I want to see everyone, have a fair go, but also contribute. Like, you want to have a society which is bolstering, not plateauing. So a really good example I remember was my friend when he moved over and his mum moved over. They came in a skilled work visa, permanent residency, and they contributed, they had a fair go, and they've made something of themselves. And now they're citizens. And to me, that brings me so much joy. But we need to be looking at it from a way which is practical and not just idealist. We can't just say, everyone's welcome, just sign this form and you're in. Because it's simply, we don't have enough capacity, we don't have the capacity to house everyone. From a social cohesion standpoint, we need to educate those here on what it's like to live in a multicultural society. So for, the old white guy down at the shop who likes to go have a Chinese takeaway of a Friday night, just a gentle reminder, hey mate, that's immigration right there. Without the stories of Chinese heritage coming across in the gold rush, or what we have now with such a booming Chinese diaspora, you wouldn't have that cuisine and that experience, and you'd be eating quite bland meals. So you have to remember that Australia's success comes from its diversity. It doesn't come from being and aligning into one type of person. We've seen historically that doesn't work. You need to be accepting of people regardless of where they come from, their religious beliefs, the color of their skin, or, their habits. People need to be accepted for who they are. And without proper education, none of that can happen.
And lastly, on the security threats, extremism and terrorism. What are the main sources in Australia? I believe Mike Burgess said it broadly falls into white nationalism and jihadism, for lack of a better term.
Religious extremism.
Yeah.
So I think, Mike Burgess is a pioneering figure of removing the layer of the the overcoats when it comes to intelligence and national security. And his threat assessments every year really show that the government's trying to increase transparency on what risks are. And by all means, go have a watch of it if you haven't, because it's phenomenal. Every year he does it. It's exceptional. We have, as he rightly mentioned, two major forms of extremism in Australia. You're kind of neo-Nazi, right-wing, white nationalist extremists who we've seen commit some abhorrent acts, most recently at Anzac Day events, booing welcomes to country by
I was
First
actually
Nations.
there at
Were you?
at that welcome to country. Yeah.
What was that like?
I mean, it was unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounded maybe a lot louder than, like, I thought there were more people than the footage
was
later
quite
showed,
isolated.
because obviously it's a quiet event and like any sound is amplified.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Terrifying, nonetheless. And so you've got that kind of group of kind of this antisocial behavior that you see from that group, which is across the country, but it's just quite hidden.
Mm.
And then you've got religious extremism, which has just been a pertinent issue since, when we saw 9/11 and kind of the history of religious extremism in our country. So I remember, you probably remember too, when the Lind Cafe siege happened in 2014, 2015, that period of time. And that was my first kind of introduction to religious extremism in Australia. I was in Sydney on that day and I was like,
Wow.
ooh, I'm good.
Jeez.
I don't want to be around that.
Yeah. Well, it shut the whole city down, didn't it? Because they were making threats that they were
gonna
devices elsewhere in the city.
a lot of risks to the city and other landmarks, because it was around Christmas time. It was January, December period from memory. And, we've seen a rise in hate-based violence against religious groups. So, whether that's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, there's so many different risks with that can be quite easily mitigated online. A lot of these groups act online. A lot of these groups are utilizing social media platforms or coordinated meetup groups or, chat lines or anything like that to commit these acts. And it also can sometimes come from a place where they don't feel they have a sense of belonging. I've noticed, at least a personal opinion, is that sometimes the people who don't feel they belong turn to extremism as a final resort of community. And so you look at the shy, anxious kid in class who's being picked on and bullied. Sometimes if they're led down the wrong path just a few steps, that's the only road they see heading. And it leads you down a path. We've seen Australians get stuck in online antisocial behaviour and then go overseas and fight for extremist groups. And our foreign ministries and defence ministries have had to deal with those risks. I think what we can do is really, I'll keep kind of beating the term educating people like a dead horse, but it's really important that we educate young Australians about the risks online. And in an age where social media is just constantly in your face. I mean, getting out of the airport today, I saw 40, 50 ads in the span of 60 seconds walking through there. Like, it's always in your face. And who's to say extremist group didn't put a join us, feeling lost, join us ad up, and someone might join them. So it's a really big risk, but we need to make sure our views are solid and our national identity is known so that doesn't deviate.
Yep. And now, I mean, going more broadly to the situation around the world, I think broadly the potential for major conflict has three sort of theatres. There's the European, Ukrainian theatre against Russia. There's the Middle Eastern theatre and obviously the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah.
Let's go through the three of those. Let's start with the most controversial one.
Sure.
The Middle East.
Off, yeah.
Yeah. I think I just rip the Band-Aid off. In your view, Israel in Gaza, people on the right of politics generally would support Israel. People otherwise would criticize what they're doing. From your perspective, you're obviously a bit more international security stuff and studies of that. What's your opinion on Israel, particularly on what how they're operating in Gaza?
The conflict generally is just awful, and the loss of life across both sides is just, no one wants to see that. In the initial stages, in my belief, Israel absolutely had the right to defend itself. The attack on October 7th was abhorrent. You're attacking innocent civilians just because of the religion they believe. However, in the preceding months and now years since that date, Israel has shown a lack of regard for ensuring civilian lives are protected and that it's done through a calculated approach. It often, when I read the news and when I look at kind of the world and what's going on over there, I'm just like, they're just going insane. Like, they're just going quite recklessly, bombing hospitals, which kind of ties into this theme of urban conflict where Hamas are utilizing civilian structures to play dirty. And in the traditional sense of war and conflict, your response should only, at least from a theoretical view, your response should always just be proportionally representative to what happened to you. You should never just go ridiculous. And where I see it is that Israel's just way over the top with this. And you're correct in saying that members of the right in politics across the world are very strongly supporting a particular cause, and in this case is Israel's cause. And as a democratic nation, we should recognize democracies and whatnot, but their conduct and their ethics with regards to another state, not fully recognized in the international system, but one I still think that should be, simply because they basically want to exterminate it at this point.
Let me just play devil's advocate.
Sure, let's do it.
Just for public discourse. What's your response to people who say, yes, it's supposed to be proportional, but as you said, Hamas is hiding, they dig their tunnels under schools and hospitals and all that. What is Israel supposed to do? That they might say, civilian casualties happen in war. It's regrettable, but a reality that they happen as collateral. Like, what's your response to that?
It's an incredibly difficult thing for any nation to be managing when they're going into conflict against somewhere which is so densely populated and dense in the theatre of war. We look historically at World War One on open fields basically, and you could dig trenches, and it was quite calculated and systematic. World War Two, similar system. Wars in this day and age are a whole lot more urban, especially with the density of the two, actors involved. The issue, it's a two-sided coin. So something that is really important, especially in the urban area, is prior notification to attacks. So say Israel wants to go and bomb this target site that they believe Hamas is headquartered in. Go do it. But they don't notify anyone. Think about, they may hit their targets, but there's also human casualties on the side, which just should never be happening. If you notify civilian kind of warnings prior to, and then hold your word to that, it can protect them. But the issue we're facing with this conflict here, and by means, let me preface, I'm no expert on the matter.
Bro, what, like 19 years old?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're just a bunch of kids chatting about it, basically.
Yeah.
The issue is that as a result of Israel's continued mortar, basically, into Gaza, there's very little places they can go. they're surrounded by all four borders, and there's no real outlets in, because you best know they're not going to let them into Israel. And if they do, they're going to be met with what I can only imagine is a terrible situation. So I think,
and they're not being let into Egypt either.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So the entire situation is very undesirable in the sense of conflict. My belief is that there just needs to be a two-state solution. It's so in no order, the hostages which Hamas has been captured from the music festival and so on and so forth, all should be released. End of torture, so on and so forth. You've seen, photos of knuckles and fingers broken and bent off and cut off as like torture methods. Israel needs to stop the consistent bombardment of just gunfire into civilian areas, because also this conflict is pertaining because Israel continues to fight. Like, Israel had a narrative of, we're just acting in self-defense, and that was credible early on. I don't think the self-defense claim is as credible now as it was back then because of the period of time we've seen. And furthermore, you're seeing growing political tension domestically in Israel. The public doesn't agree with the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu for the most part. And for an election to an election can't be called in a wartime period. So a theory in my mind is that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to stay in conflict so that he can't be rolled. It's a theory that some commentators bring out, and it's one that I
the
could
incentives
subscribe to.
are there, I guess, yeah.
But the issue is that we're not going to see a two-state solution until, Hamas, which is a listed terrorist organization and one which has wreaked terror internationally, not just confined to, Palestine, is, eradicated in a way, though, which doesn't bring upon mass casualties.
Well, that was the, again, playing devil's advocate, just for interest in the conversation. Returning the hostages, ceasefire, all of that two-state solution, it's reliant on both parties actually wanting to.
Exactly.
And, Hamas is not going to give up.
No.
So
why should they?
So
is the question many people argue. And also, something to remember is that the region as a whole is rather unstable. So the Middle East naturally is not the most coherent. They don't share the same views. You have so many religions there. You're looking at Christianity, Judaism, Islam. The birthplace is there. So there's a lot of passion for your beliefs there. And it's a very holy region. It is just appalling to me to see the level of human casualty that we're seeing in this conflict. Conflict is, unfortunately, I think, inevitable in this global order. There's winners and losers, and sometimes to win you have to commit. To win, you have to go to war. You have to have a battle. It's like a game of handball. To progress up, you've got to beat someone else.
Well, on that concept, let's jump to the US strikes on Iran. In the US, there's been domestic political opposition to it. There's actually, I think both the left and the right wing of American politics have both split on this. So there's people on the right wing. I think Ben Shapiro is one of them who advocated for the strikes. Tucker Carlson's one of them who went against them. And then there's different views on the left, but I think generally against the strikes. So for people who are, just briefly explain what happened, and then do you think the ceasefire is going to hold? Yeah. What about the nuclear program, that sort of thing?
So the attacks on Iran that happened under what the US has bravely called Operation Midnight Hammer, which is a really fun title and really gets you going. Real patriotism.
Sounds like an Avengers movie.
Yeah, it feels a bit like it, doesn't it? Basically, it was a strike package of B-2 Spirit bombers looking to take out Iranian nuclear stockpiles, which they were going to use to build nuclear weapons. So people believe. At least that's what the consensus was.
Is that the consensus shared by the NSC?
I'm not aware of the NSC's position
Oh,
on
okay.
it. I'll speak from an individual
You're
point.
sure? Yeah,
Like,
from what you've seen.
I think there's enough evidence there consistently over a long period of time, and the neglection of nuclear watchdogs to say that there could be some movement there. And, there have been foreign actors such as Russia providing assistance in that world. So it's a very possible reality. And as a deterrence, the US thought, let's bomb all those sites as a deterrence mechanism because they may use it on any number of, whether it's Israel, whether it's the US specifically, it could be anyone. And so I think a blanket belief is that nuclear weapons should not be. Unfortunately, the devil played and the devil danced, and now we have nuclear weapons in the world, but they should never be used. We should never see a nuclear warhead be fired and utilized, because we saw what happened, in World War II with Japan, and it was absolutely, devastating, the kind of death and destruction it caused. And it would bring the end of the earth. The minute any of the major powers fire their nuclear warhead, that's it. That's game over. And it's a real threat that those world leaders would face every single day. But the US's strike on the Iranian nuclear stockpiles, look, they claim it was a raving success. Reviews come back saying it was moderate to severe damage on the site, so it may not have actually done as much damage as we know, but nonetheless, my personal take is, what are you doing? Like, the US doesn't have a direct involvement in the war in Iran. Israel and Iran are kind of like old enemies. They just don't necessarily get on, and it comes again to religious-based conflict, which is what we're seeing in this era. Do I think the US should have gotten involved? No. I think it was an ill-judged decision to become involved in a conflict that you did not necessarily need to be involved in, and it's brought upon serious levels of instability across the globe once again. And it feels like, some people I talk to call it the Trump effect. And it's just anytime Trump's in power, global instability shocks. And I saw a poll this morning about who British people see as the most trustworthy nations to work with. The most untrustworthy nations, it went in this order: Russia, the USA, which had climbed from like 10th to 2nd in a year, and then China. And it is fully dictating on the unpredictable nature of President Trump's leadership. It doesn't follow a global world order. That one's gone. The American empire, as much as my personal belief, is on the rocks, because you have a leader who is so unpredictable that people don't feel secure.
Well, yeah, let's talk about Trump. Let's talk about the alliance as well between the US and Australia.
Sure.
So, yeah, there's obviously the view that a lot of people hold that Trump is a destabilizing, untrustworthy, egotistical figure that destabilizes the world. And then there's the other view that goes, well, hey, Russia invaded Ukraine under Joe Biden. The Hamas attack happened under Joe Biden. Whereas Trump has, he hasn't solved the war in Ukraine, as he promised. But there's no new wars, and the Israel-Iran conflict is sort of a continuation from October 7th. Like, there's those sort of things. What do you think, though, in terms of the Trump administration's foreign policy? Is it a sort of isolationist policy, or from what you've seen, is it more of a pivot to Asia? I asked Drew Pavlu about this last time. He thought it was more of an isolationist stance. But yeah, what do you think?
I'd be in the same boat. I don't think it's a pivot to anywhere in particular. I think it's Trump, despite his actions, is actually meant to be inherently anti-war. At least so he believes, and portrays it in his countless speeches that he does across the country in the election campaign. And when we look at, all these wars being started under XYZ president, what needs to be remembered as well is that these wars do not directly have anything to do with the US, in the sense of Ukraine might be an ally of the United States, but the US doesn't have a key strategic it's always had a strategic interest, but I don't think it had as much priority on the US's foreign policy list as Israel, for example. And I think that stems down to domestic lobbying and the strength of some interest groups other than others, and donations and the back room of politics. I think, though, that with regards to Trump's foreign policy, I've heard some people describe it as ludicrous. I wouldn't go that far. I think it takes an isolationist approach, and he's trying to do what he believes and what the Republican Party, in quotations, believes is best for America, and that means slashing immigration, kicking out, illegal citizens who have lived there, and furthermore, developing a policy which is, it almost seems sometimes of who can pay me the most money and I'll do you a good one, mates rates, because the policy just doesn't seem to be coherent. It doesn't seem to be respectful of the relationships that the United States has formed over a long period of time with allies, and that would reflect an isolationist policy platform. It's very, as Trump described it in his inauguration speech, America First policy, and his agenda to focus on the US first and foremost, and as he describes it, clean up Joe Biden's mess. That's his primary objective. He, within days, unsubscribed from the World Health Organization, unsubscribed from the World Trade Organization, I believe. He also cut USAID, which crippled parts of Central Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and the Pacific, because he didn't think the costs were necessary, and instead developed an administration with some of the most poignant people in the country,
Very diplomatic wording there.
Appointing Elon Musk to a government efficiency position for him to then only leave, and then they have a Twitter fight for a day. Or putting Pete Hegseth, who is a former Fox News commentator with very particular views, as his defense secretary. Whilst serving, I will credit that. It's good to have someone who's served as your defense secretary. I think, though, the platform is it's not hitting the mark, and it isn't respecting of the global rules world order kind of format that Reagan and Thatcher developed all them years ago.
In terms of what we can actually affect as Australia, can we can talk about AUKUS, but generally, is there a case for saying, Australia just needs to, show some skin in the game or more commitment to win over Trump's personal favour or whatever? Is there a way that is that the approach we should take?
If you've ever seen the ABC series Nemesis, it talks about the 10 years of Liberal government, and there's a part in there which talks about dealing with Donald Trump. And Malcolm Turnbull, an exceptional world leader, may I add. Malcolm Turnbull on the global stage was phenomenal. His ability to use business tactics, which is inherently transactional. You've got something I want and you need something from me, so I'm going to sell you that and we'll make a trade. That's the kind of mindset that I think Donald Trump views the world. I'm only going to do deals with you if I can get the better side of the deal.
Do you think that approach is going to work this time?
No.
Why?
I don't think he even knows what he's doing. I think sometimes he wakes up in the morning and he goes, oh, I'm going to do this today. And then by evening he goes, we're not doing that anymore. I think there's adjustments, and simply he is so unpredictable in the current environment. We're already facing a global environment with global uncertainty left, right and center. And then you throw Trump into the mix to be the saving grace, and it actually just deepens the issue. And what we saw last time was an administration that was shaped around him to provide stability. First term president needs to see, what does it look like to be president? I need an experienced team around me. This time around, he's done it for 4 years. He knows what he's doing. For Australia, I think we need to stay strong with our values. I think we need to diversify our partners. We should be looking elsewhere. I think, me personally, I think we should be looking at the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland. They are the masters of preparedness because of their historical ties with Russia and the wars that's going on there. I think we need to look at them for preparedness, look at the European Union. Richard Marles, our current defence minister, is over there doing some work with NATO at the moment on the side. And I think we need to strengthen our partners in Asia. Look at ASEAN, look at the Pacific, look at the Japanese, for example, and see what does it look like to work with people outside of the old friend.
So is your belief that AUKUS is not going to go as planned?
I am optimistic for the future of AUKUS, and I think it would provide a lot of capability for Australia, but we got the short straw of the deal. We are presented with an option which is inherently still better for the US than it is for us. And that was signed in the last government without Trump. What if he goes there and actually moves the goalposts over here and forward some so it's better for him again? It's all going to just play out, but I believe that the long-lasting friendship that Australia and the United States have and will continue to have. And if democracy plays its course, this program will transcend Donald Trump's second term.
The friendship of the peoples is stronger.
It's so strong. You can go anywhere in the United States, we were talking before, and feel welcome there. And I think that trickles up to the top. And I think that we have a really good relationship through things like sports diplomacy, our love of, action, sports, our shared values that we've historically held will continue to kind of support that transition. And fingers crossed AUKUS will go ahead because it's such a boost to our strategic capability. But I think it needs to be improved more through diversification.
Last topic to speak about, politics. You've had a bit of political involvement. Do you want to just list it off quickly and I'll ask you a couple of rapid fire questions?
Yeah, sure. So I've always been interested in politics as a young person with civic engagement attached to his left knee is. I became passionate about politics through the watchings of three people in particular. Julie Bishop, the foreign minister at the time during the MH370 and 17 crashes. To me, she was what it looked like to be a leader of Australia globally.
That was the crash in Ukraine and in the Indian Ocean.
In the ocean.
Yeah.
Hopefully to be found one day.
Yeah.
So those two separate incidences, and how Julie Bishop, at the time she was president of the United Nations Security Council, and she took this motion to the council against Russia, who's a permanent member, and even they were, in favour of it and recognition. Like Julie Bishop's ability to shirt front world leaders and represent Australian interests abroad, she was the best. I think she's the one of, if not the best foreign minister we've ever had in this country. That's my personal take. second of all, my local member, Michael McCormack. So he's
a national.
He's a Nat. He's was deputy and acting prime minister at one period of time. He was acting prime minister during Scott Morrison's infamous trip to Hawaii. So
Vacation.
Little family vacation, you could call it. He's been very community minded, and so growing up in Wagga, being able to see, people like him in the community, I'd see him at events all the time because it's a small community, and from there, it kind of made me wonder. For me in politics, where do I sit? Personally, I sit near the centre, but just to the right, quite moderate within the centre right. Socially, I would view myself as more progressive, but economically, we need to focus on kind of a bit more conservative leaning things.
So sort of like a small L liberal.
Exactly, a small L liberal. And so through youth parliament, through things that we've talked about before, I was able to meet a lot of different MPs and build those relationships, those networks, if you will. And that led me to landing an internship with a Liberal backbencher, Zoe McKenzie, who I still ad hoc help on the side. And she taught me a lot about what it is to be a Liberal and what it is to view the world through this particular lens. And so for the last, from June of last year until December of last year, basically, I was doing a week or so, a month of work for her, and then I went in and assisted her with budget night this year. And she's a terrific example of what compassionate leadership looks like, but fair leadership, and she's the future of the Liberal Party. So I'm sure we'll get to it, but we had a howler this year in the federal election.
I think that's an understatement.
Yeah. And I think Susan really did it quite well in her speech yesterday to National Press Club in saying that we got smashed, and not just small smash, but we got obliterated. And for me, politics is about the battle of ideas, and for me, as different with potentially other members of the party I support, I am happy to break lines for the views I believe in and see what's right for the best of Australian interests, and it may adjust accordingly, but for me and with politics, it's the battle of ideas, and it's making sure that the best foot is forward for Australia.
So you were an exec for the Australian Liberal Students Federation.
I was, yeah.
Is it lonely being like a young Liberal type? Or was it lonely being a young Liberal type thing on campus? There's a lot of left-wing student groups. Membership of Young Labour is far higher, I believe.
It's absolutely huge, and it's a credit to that part of politics for the way they can interact with young people. And it's was nice on interactions on campus where you get to talk and discuss ideas with peers who may not see the world through the same view, and be able to have discourse but never be disrespectful. And that's one thing I like about at least the student politics scene at ANU. I'm admittedly not the most active, but everyone has a home on campus. That's one of the great things about university, is that no matter your belief, there is people out there. It might be a little bit harder to find them if you're a centre-right Liberal viewing Australian, but there are people out there, and there are good people out there who want to see the nation advance through a particular view. And there's also people who see it through a different lens. We've got, at least at ANU, you've got, the SALT, the socialist alternatives who, they're a mechanism within their own sense. You've got the Greens, Labor, the Libs. I've seen some unis even have One Nation. Like, the whole spectrum's represented. And I think it's a testament to how young people are picking up political discourse.
Just on Susan Lee, I've seen a few criticisms raised so far. I'd like to get your thoughts on them. So one was this thing about it being a glass cliff. It's been a time of crisis, and some people in the media say Susan Lee's been elevated to the leadership so that she can have to deal with the mess and then be replaced by someone else who eventually wins. What's your view on that?
I'm not a subscriber to that view of it being a glass cliff. Susan is an excellent leader and is someone from my part of the world, my neck of the woods, and I've been able to see the benefits she's created. To
She's from Albury, Wodonga, right?
Yeah, she's from Farrer, so the next seat over. And she's done a lot for her community, through being a pilot to now in federal politics. She's done it all, and she is capable of the leadership that she's been given. She was deputy in the last government. No one commented about it then. And I think the perception that a lot of commentators have is, we're putting a woman in now when the time is awful and this creates the glass ceiling. But I strongly believe that Susan Lee has what it takes to realign the Liberal Party, bring it back to what it once was, which was a broad church. The Liberal Party takes in people from left, right, up, down, backwards, frontwards. But Susan represents the sensible centre, and realistically, with the Australian electorate, you can only win from the middle. You can't win from being in an extreme, and we saw that. Peter Dutton's campaign was out at the right. It also didn't incorporate women, and I think that's an absolute embarrassment, because we have had an issue with women in the Liberal Party. You can't sugarcoat it. You can't run from it. More women deserve to be in politics, and we should be supporting more women joining the Liberal Party, because there are exceptional women across the country who would make great leaders within our political party. But because of the boys' club culture which has transpired over previous decades, we just haven't seen it happen.
And final question on politics. The Liberal Party lost on young people. I mean, generally, progressive parties win over young people. But is there a way that the Liberal Party, you think, can win over young people? Do they need to engage more with new media, podcasts like this? Please encourage some Liberal people and Labor people to come on here. Because during the campaign, Peter Dutton was on Sky News a lot, like Sky News After Dark. And that's an audience that he was already going to get the votes for, even through preferences. Is it like new media? Is it TikTok or whatever?
It's precisely that. We need to meet the electorate where they are. So, yes, we're still going to need to go on Sky News After Dark and get those senior voters. Realistically, the older you get, historically, the more conservative you get for that time period. So the older voters was never really an issue, but for some reason, Peter Dutton was afraid of going to the other media platforms. And something Susan has done from the get-go is engage with young media. So you look at platforms like the Daily Oz, which is very young people focused. Susan was just on there the other week. We need to be utilizing social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, other social media platforms which young people tune into instead of tune out of, like traditional media. The way elections are running and the way politics is running is changing because our generation is completely, they got the narrative and just ripped it. They got the way elections were run historically and ripped it up and sent it off. I've never in my life, yes, I'm only 20, but I've never seen young people going up to an election booth and instead of taking the how to vote card, signing it and giving it back to the person like an autograph. Like, I think that's great.
I think that's great.
And I think it's hilarious that young people are seeing fun in politics because it can be fun. Like, we've done some hilarious things up on the hill. They do cricket matches between the press gallery and the politicians. So it needs to be about engaging them there, but it needs to be about providing a platform which young people want to listen to. If we're just going to cater to the old and bold, we're not going to win anything. We're going to go backwards and could very well face extinction. So we need to look to the future. We need to look at what young people like us here and everyone else in the studio believe in and adapt.
Well, Angus, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.